For the longest time, headphones were just a tool for me. I used them when I needed to live monitor while I was recording. I used them as secondary auxiliary mixes, like second opinions when I needed to reference them from my monitors. They were essentially just a tool for recording, and they were a second opinion. But recently, I've become increasingly obsessed with headphones, and I've actually recently gotten a really high quality audiophile pair called the Hi-Fi Man Sundara. So many of you are probably already going to be familiar with the Sundara, but a large portion of you probably won't be. And that's because whenever we talk about mixing and recording music, production tends to stick by a select few models. Whenever it comes to production, you're probably going to pick up something from Sennheiser, Beyerdynamic, or the Audio-Technica M series. These are the M30s. Probably the M50s are the most popular. One could argue then that there is a gap between studio headphones and audiophile headphones. But what is that distinction? What makes them different? So in this video, I'm going to venture to try and answer a question that I've asked myself. What are the differences between an audiophile pair of headphones or hi-fi listening and a studio pair of headphones? The line is actually a lot blurrier than you might think. I like to use the analogy of the square and rectangle conundrum. Every square is a rectangle, not every rectangle is a square. Well, if we're going to go by that logic, I could say that every pair of studio headphones are audiophile headphones, but not all audiophile headphones are studio headphones. Oh, and where do these come into play? Oh, guys, thank you. So before we go any further, let's talk about today's sponsor. Who is it? It's DistroKid. It's always DistroKid. If you don't know DistroKid, allow me to be your first point of contact because you will probably publish your music on DistroKid. It is by far the best and easiest site for uploading your music to the rest of the world. It's how you get your music seen. You can get your music on every platform that every other artist has their platform on. I'm talking about Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, Tidal. I don't know why I put Pandora before Tidal, but Pandora is probably still relevant somewhere. Deezer, and also like TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, one you're on right now. On DistroKid, you get 100% of your streaming revenue and you get it for a flat fee. But on top of that, DistroKid has a bunch of other cool programs that you can use to your advantage. Last week, we talked about how you can actually make an NFT with DistroKid. This week, we're talking about how you can donate portions of your revenue to charity using DistroKid, all within the site itself. By utilizing DistroKid's split feature, you can actually choose to donate from a number of different charities across the United States. You can also choose the percentage of revenue you want to give to these organizations. You can choose to donate all of it if you want. I want to talk about one of the charities that's kind of closer to me. I want to highlight North Brooklyn Angels, just because I'm in Brooklyn. I feel like it has a little bit more of a direct connection to me. This is an all-volunteer organization that donates 3,000 hot meals a week to people in need in Brooklyn. And using your art, you can help them through DistroKid. And there's a bunch of other cool ones too. I'm just going to read some from the list here. Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Slice Out for Hunger, NAACP Legal Defense Fund. These are all things that you can support through your music. And I think that's amazing. And from that, I'm going to go into the normal plug where I tell you I have a link down in my description that you can use in order to sign up for DistroKid with a discount. It also helps me out on the channel if you use that link. And with that, back to the headphone show. So let's start with some basic headphone anatomy, and forgive me if you're already familiar with this stuff. We are fortunate enough in this community to have a wide range of experience levels from beginner to people way more advanced than I am. So I'm going to repeat info. You might have already heard it. If not, welcome to new info. So let's talk about two extremely large factors when it comes to the sound quality of your headphones, that being closed back versus open back, and then the frequency response. Now, open backs are exactly how they sound. They have an open back to let sound bleed out, and in this case, we have a mesh grill on the back. Now, this makes the sound more breathable or more open, and the result is what we call a wider sound stage. A wise man once said it's like VR for your ears. You're going to perceive things in your environment as if they're in the song and vice versa. There's the illusion of an extended dimensionality with your headphones. You'll feel like something is coming from behind you, in front of you, or at least farther to the left and farther to the right. Now, one thing about open back headphones that might hinder their ability to perform in a studio environment is what we call headphone bleed. Because open back headphones bleed all of that sound into the environment around you, it's definitely going to go into the microphone, especially if it's a condenser microphone. If you're specifically working with a click, you're probably going to hear it depending on the volume level you have in your open back headphones. Now, these are called the Status CB1s, and they are most certainly closed back, closed shell on the back, It is basically what you've seen with every headphone you've probably experienced in your life. But more on this in a bit. Let's move on to the other factor, being the frequency response. Now, let's take a look at the frequency response of the Hi-Fi Men Sundara as an example. Now, if you look to the left, you will see all frequencies in the lowest threshold of human hearing. And then on the right are the highest thresholds of human hearing. The lowest thing you're going to be able to hear is extremely low, almost felt more than it is heard. And primarily what you're listening to, if you're using your ears, is the mid-range. The mid-range is where the vocals are, the guitar. The majority of all harmonic content lies within the mids. And then whenever we're talking about things that are more high up, that's more like cymbals and hits and S's and tss, 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 tss. That's a lot of high end. Now, a key difference here is studio headphones are almost always aiming to be what we call flat. Another term for this is reference grade. What this means is we don't have any boosts, we don't have any peaks, and we don't have any troughs below that standard zero line on the frequency response. Now, what that translates to in terms of mixing is what you hear in your computer, what you hear in the microphone is exactly represented without any input from your headphones. If, for example, your headphones have a large peak in the upper mid-range, which is pretty common, well, then your headphones are sort of lying to you. It's exaggerating the upper mid-range and therefore not giving you an accurate idea of what it might sound like whenever you put it on another set of speakers. So when we talk about what we need in a studio environment, we need all of our speakers and we need basically all of our outputs to be as honest as possible, because we want to leave that stylized element to the consumer grade speakers. Let the Sonys and the Airpods of the world handle stylizing the sound however they may see fit, no matter how much I might disagree with how they stylize it. It's like driving with impaired vision. Now, in general, audiophile headphones do not have to abide by this, although many of them do. Quite honestly, I think a lot of audiophiles want to hear the same level of reference as producers do. But you might find headphones that don't particularly abide by this. For example, Grados. Grados are a really great example of a headphone that chooses to prioritize certain frequency bands, particularly in the high end. They're known for having a really nice, clear, sparkly high end. And if you're using these for mixing, they wouldn't necessarily be reference grade and therefore maybe aren't exactly what you are producing or writing. The sonic landscape you are listening to in your mix, because you're mixing on Grados, may not necessarily be the same sound that comes out of your car speakers. So, judging by this logic, the ideal studio headphone should be closed back and should be reference grade. Well, yeah. And also kinda no, it gets kinda muddy. Probably why there isn't very many videos on the internet on this topic, because it's not cut and dry. See, for example, if you're using headphones to mix, open backs would be the ideal scenario because it's wider. I tend to find whenever I'm mixing on closed back headphones, because they're so narrow, I actually tend to compensate the stereo image a little bit too much. I'm basically forcing an overly wide stereo image. And this might be more disjointed whenever I come to reference it on studio monitors, or the average car test. It therefore depends a lot on your goals. If your headphones are purely meant for mixing, you don't have the money for studio monitors, by all means, go with open back. But I think in a lot of traditional home studio setups, the headphone, as I mentioned in the beginning, is more of a tool for live tracking and recording and to be a second opinion on your mixes. And in this scenario, I would definitely recommend closed back. A couple things to consider beyond just frequency response and open and closed back headphones are things like impedance and sensitivity. Impedance is essentially the power needed to run your headphones. The higher the impedance, the more likely you're going to need an independent headphone amp. Impedance is measured in ohms. The higher the ohms are, the more we need to worry about whether our laptops especially can run it, or if maybe our budget audio interface can run it. Now, if you do have an audio interface like most of us producers do have, you're probably fine. But in general, I would say stay below 80 ohms as a safe level without needing external headphone amps. So if we consider the headphone impedance as sort of a x-axis, let's just go with me for now, we would consider sensitivity to be the y-axis, the dynamic range of your headphones. Dynamic range has a lot to do with instrument separation, and in general is a little bit more of a complex topic that maybe deserves a little bit more time in another video. But in the beginning of the video, I mentioned these. Focus. these. AirPods bring up an interesting point of conversation because more than likely you have a version of these in your house. And whether that means it's the AirPods Pro like these, whether that means it's just your regular AirPods, or whether that means you have those wired AirPods that are probably in a drawer somewhere, or maybe your dog is eating them as we speak. Well, why not mix on these? See, because here's the thing, this whole time I'm talking about how we need to have an honest signal. We need to have all these honest signals so that whenever we go to consumer level speakers, they sound nice. Now, consumer level speakers in general tend to kind of use audio trickery to influence the feeble-minded into thinking that their headphones sound better than they do. And they do that using what we call a V-curve. They're bloating the low end and they're bloating the high end, and all that mid-range where all the harmonic information is typically stored is sort of silenced or stifled. The good thing about AirPods is not only are these really, really common and almost everyone has heard a version of how Apple Audio sounds, they're also pretty flat. It's important though to mention if you're working with AirPods specifically, you can't really use them to live track. You would probably need to use your cabled, whatever random cabled earbuds you have available to you. But whenever it comes to mixing, you're basically working in the same auditory realm that everyone else is already used to. You're essentially tailoring your production to a universal sound. I mean, you guys know me. I tend to err on the side of preferring the cheaper product. If the cheaper product can do the exact same thing as the expensive product, or at least a close enough version to it, I'm almost always going to side with that product. We love gear here, but above that, we love studio jank. We love whatever gets the job done. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to write a little ditty. I haven't written it yet, but I will. And we're going to mix it on all three of these. The Status Audio CB1s, which are a relatively flat, but also a really affordable $50 closed-back headphone. We're going to do it on the AirPods Pro. Also going to mix on the Hi-Fi Men Sundara. You can choose for yourself which one you prefer. And who knows, maybe the old white boys... I shouldn't say that. Maybe the white ones will be your preferred sound. Merry Christmas! Okay, so those were all of the mixes, and now I just want to give a quick rundown of how that went, experientially speaking. Clearly, I'm not in my studio anymore. I'm visiting family, and I'm working in a very limited setup. Just Ableton and a little mixer that Flamma sent to me. Shout out to Flamma. My review of the board did not do it justice. It's a great little piece of hardware. So I'm actually going to start off with the CB1s and the Sundaras, because they were most akin to what I'm normally used to working with. Although one of them was closed back and one of them was a open back headphone, honestly, they were quite similar in my approach. I was able to hear just as much of the soundstage on each, although their sound signature was very different. There's much more of a peak with the CB1s in the upper mid-range than there were with the Sundaras. But I think the result was a rather similar mix. Now, let's talk about the AirPods. I sort of felt like I was riding blind the whole time. The mixing choices that I decided to make with the AirPods were much more extreme. And that's probably because I couldn't figure out the soundstage as well. Just in general, the audio image was so narrow that in order to sort of experience any level of space, I made much more extreme mixing decisions. Clearly, the guitar solo in the Airpods was much dirtier, much more in your face, and I don't think that necessarily ended up good for the final mix. You can consider this part of the video maybe an audit of the first half of this video. What I'm telling you in the first half of this video is not particularly special. It's not particularly unique. I feel like a lot of engineers would tell you the exact same things, but I want to show you now what it was like and what these mixes ended up sounding like in the output, whatever. So to wrap up, experientially, the closed back and the open back were not that different, although the Sindaras were remarkably easier. And to be honest, the Status CB1s and the Hi-Fi Min Sindara resulted in a mix in about half the time that the Airpods did. And the Airpods felt much more like I was writing blind, and I had to make mix decisions that were much more extreme in order to hear it in the headphones. And the resulting mix probably took 2 to 3 times as long to create, and I don't necessarily think that time translated to a better mix. Now with that would be the end of the video. Once again, not in my studio, and in a random apartment, armed with nothing more than a mixer. Goodbye.